Welcome to the next video in the Blueprint of Life topic. This video is going to be looking at the following dot point. Describe using specific examples how the theory of evolution is supported by the following areas of study. Paleontology, including fossils that have been considered as transitional forms. Biogeography, comparative embryology, comparative anatomy, and biochemistry. So what we're going to do first is have a look at a bit of a mind map that shows how each of those provides some kind of evidence, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail for each of the five. So when Darwin put forward his theory of natural selection to explain what was happening in evolution, evolution was actually far from a new idea in science. But the thing that really made Darwin's voice stick, or Darwin's ideas stick, is that he presented enormous volumes of evidence that helped to support his ideas. So this came from his traveling on the HMS Beagle, where he went to a number of different countries around the world and made many observations of plant and animal species to show that there had to be some kind of relationship between these organisms. So evidence for evolution can be broken up into the 5 points from our syllabus. So the first one is paleontology. Paleontology is the study of fossils, which helps to show a graduation from simple to more complex forms in our organisms. So when we have a look at the rock layers, the simple organisms, unicellular, really basic organisms are in the really low levels of the rock layers, right through to our really complex multicellular organisms up in the upper layers. We have transitional forms that show changes from one group to another, and one example of this is the Archaeopteryx, which I'll go into more detail in a second. Our second piece of evidence is comparative anatomy, which looks at similar anatomy or structures which can help to refer to a common ancestor that these particular organisms once had. So this is also sometimes referred to as homologous structure. So homologous, we know homo is the same, so the same kind of structure, however, they don't have the same functions. One particular example that we'll be looking at in a first-hand investigation is the pentadactyl limb. So penta meaning 5, dactyl fingers. So the 5-fingered limbs of a wide range of vertebrates that have very different outward-looking structures. However, when you look at their forearms and their upper arms and the way that their hand or the limb that they have that is similar to a human's hand, you see that there's very similar bone structure. As well as comparative anatomy, we also have comparative embryology, which is the comparisons of embryos of different species at early stages of development. Well, what we've actually found is that embryos of all vertebrates have gill slits and tails. So obviously humans don't have those once they reach maturity. So they have seen that if there's some kind of similarities in the embryo stage, is that also evidence to show that these organisms were once related and over time have evolved to their particular environments. Then we have biogeography, which is the geographical distribution of organisms. And these distributions can be broken up by barriers, which may lead to new species forming in particular areas because they obviously cannot come in contact with other organisms in order to breed. So what actually happens is a new species forms that doesn't share a gene pool with any other species that already existed. And lastly, our fifth one is biochemistry, which is the study of the chemical building blocks that make up organisms, such as DNA, proteins, such as one example being cytochrome C, amino acids, and hemoglobin. And we can have a look at the similarities and differences in the types of these chemicals that that make up different organisms to see how closely or distantly they're related. So let's start off by looking specifically at paleontology. So paleontology is the study of fossils, and fossils are the remains or impressions of past life. So they can include footprints, bones, leaves, coprolites, which is basically fossilized poo, and may be found in stone, ice, tar, or amber. And what we've seen is that fossils show that some species have changed gradually over time. Others have become extinct because they were featured in the fossil record, however, obviously no longer walk the face of the earth. and some, such as sharks and crocodiles, have changed very little over time. The fossil record is often patchy because the chance of an organism becoming fossilized is rare. Conditions need to be really specific in order for an organism to be able to be fossilized. However, some groups of organisms have a large number of fossils, which makes it possible to observe changes over time. The horse is a good example of an animal with an extensive fossil record, and this fossil record shows that changes have occurred over time from early horses, which were small animals with 4 toes and a small cheek span, to the modern horse, which is large with only 1 toe, large teeth, and a large cheek span. So fossils have been found of horses with 3 toes and intermediate cheek span, showing that there has been a gradual change from the early horses to our modern horse. Some fossils also have features that place them between different groups of organisms, and they are thought to have been intermediate groups and are known as transitional forms. One of the most famous examples of a transitional form is the Archaeopteryx, which we can see here on this side of the slide. So the Archaeopteryx was a bird-like reptile. It had reptile-like features such as teeth, a long tail, and bird-like features such as feathers on its wings, and attachment for flight muscles on the sternum. So it actually had almost like a keel-like bone that ran through the middle of its chest. It was probably a poor flyer due to its size, but is thought to have been an endotherm, so the feathers may have been important in temperature control. The fossils of Archaeopteryx support the theory that reptiles were ancestors of birds. The Archaeopteryx is not thought to be not to be a direct ancestor of birds, but however, the in-between link between showing how we moved from one group to the other. So some modern views of evolution, such as punctuated equilibrium, that we'll be having a look at a little bit later, disagree with the concept of transitional forms. So we can see our fossil record can tell us lots of information. As I said, our really simple organisms down the bottom, in the oldest rocks, through to our really highly specialized and detailed organisms in the upper layers, which we refer to this as the law of superposition. So next we have comparative anatomy. So some organisms have similar anatomy or structures, which can be seen as evidence for evolution from a common ancestor. Structures that share common features are called homologous structures. For example, the pentadactyl limb or the 5-fingered limbs of vertebrates are homologous structures. So we can see here a comparison of the limbs such as frogs, whales, dogs, bats, or birds even, along with humans, supports the theory that vertebrates share a common ancestor. Each limb consists of 1 bone in the upper part, so we can see they all have just 1 bone in the upper part, even though they're all different sizes and thicknesses. Then 2 bones in the lower limb, leading to 5 digits, whether they be fingers or toes. There have been modifications on the general plan, but the basic structure is still visible. Bats have extended finger bones forming wings. Frogs have 4 fingers and 5 toes, while whale flippers show the pentadactyl structure of the forelimbs. So we can see here perfectly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some homologous structures have become vestigial organs, which means that they no longer appear to have a function and are greatly reduced. So whales have parts of the pelvis and leg bones that are remnants of their 4-legged ancestors, and sometimes individual whales are found that have small limbs protruding from their sides. The human appendix is a vestigial organ which is no longer used in digestion, and the presence of these vestigial organs also helps to provide evidence of descent from a common ancestor. So as I said, we'll be doing a first-hand investigation to actually have a look at these pentadactyl limbs in a number of different examples in vertebrate species. So next we have comparative embryology. And embryology is the study of embryos and their development. So comparative embryology is the comparison of embryos of different species at early stages of development and provides support for the theory of evolution. Embryos of vertebrates, such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, have structures that appear to be gill slits and tails, which we can see in each one of these embryos that's on the screen. These gill slits developed into the gills in fish, and humans they developed to be part of the eustachian tube in the ear. The tail remains in fish, amphibians and reptiles, but it is greatly reduced in birds and humans. The similarities in structure of the embryos point to a common ancestry. Species that are closely related, such as the humans and chimpanzees, share more similarities in their embryonic development than humans and fish. Okay, so we can see here we have a human, and the similarities between humans and the other mammals are much greater than between humans and the fish in the later stages of development. But as we can see here, it would be quite difficult to tell the difference between different species if we were just to have a look at the embryos, not the organisms that they're found in. So next we have biogeography. So biogeography is the study of the geographical distribution of organisms. There are 6 major biogeographical zones in the world, and these zones are separated by physical barriers such as seas, mountains, and rivers. Barriers separate populations of organisms in different regions, preventing them from interbreeding. This may produce new species if populations evolve independently and do not share a common gene pool. When Alfred Wallace was working in Indonesia, he noticed differences between the flora and fauna of Bali and Lombok, even though the 2 islands are close together. For example, Bali has birds which are common to Asia, and Lombok has Australian parrots. So Wallace proposed Wallace's line, which was a hypothetical line between the islands, marking the separation of the Australian and Asian fauna. He suggested that these differences exist because Australia had separated from Asia before placental mammals evolved. So the Australian marsupials had thrived in isolation, while those in Asia had been outcompeted by placenta mammals and became extinct. Wallace's line marks the border of 2 major biogeographical zones, the Oriental and Australian. Oriental zone fauna includes orangutans, rhinoceros, tigers, and elephants, and the Australian fauna includes marsupials such as the cuscus and bandicoots. Barriers may enable new species to develop, and these changes in isolated populations give support to the theory of evolution. And lastly, we have biochemistry. Organisms that share a common ancestry also share the same basic chemical building blocks. For example, the common genetic material in all organisms is deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. Organisms also share common proteins, amino acid sequences, and hemoglobins. Even organisms as different as humans and bacteria share common proteins. For example, cytochrome C is a protein found in all organisms that respire aerobically with oxygen. Continuing advances in technology are revealing more detailed information about the biochemistry of organisms, providing stronger evidence of the evolutionary relationships between them. And again, we'll be doing a bit of a secondary source investigation to see how technology has improved our understanding of relationships between organisms. And in particular, we'll be having a look at a few different examples of biochemistry, including DNA hybridization, as well as looking at amino acid sequencing and understanding similarities and differences between cytochrome C. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching.